Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This lab is going to be pretty different than most of the other labs we've done in that I'm not giving you a skeleton ahead of time, but I want to walk through with you how to build this infrastructure to create a program with a graphical user interface. So I'm going to actually walk through with you the first 5 steps of the lab. I'm going to walk through steps 1 through 5 with you. If all of your infrastructure is in place, I encourage you to go ahead and follow along with me as I do these steps. As I walk through these steps, I'm going to explain what's going on and how these different pieces work together. So, I think there's going to be some value in that as well. So, one thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a program that lets you drag and drop to build the graphical user interface. In your Java code, then you'll be bridging that user interface over to your actual Java code. I'm going to caution you about something which is, I didn't realize this until a few minutes ago when I was running through the lab before coming here. There are a couple of mistakes in the instructions in the lab. So as I walk through the lab with you, I'm going to alert you to where those mistakes are, and I'm going to show you how to fix them. And I'll go back and fix the web page later on. But I want you to be aware of that now and alert to it as I walk through it. So a program that turns out to be really helpful for building this stuff is called Scene Builder. And I have a link to Scene Builder from the Lab 6 page over here. And so I really want to encourage you to go ahead and install Scene Builder on your machine. And so there's a little installer here. On Windows, I used the window installer. If you're on a Mac, you can use the Mac installer. So why don't you go ahead and try to get that going, and we'll see how things proceed. So I'm going to leave that in the background for you all to look at as I start talking about how JavaFX applications are put together. And to that end, we're going to assemble one incrementally as we go. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to explain these different pieces as I go along. So actually, first, let me quickly rename my already existing version of this, since I want to create a new project from scratch. Okay, so what this program is going to be that we're going to build together is a tip calculator that you could use to determine how much you want to offer to the server when you're at a restaurant. So to that end, I'm going to go over to IntelliJ, and I'm going to select that I want to create a new project. And there is this option to create it as a JavaFX project. That has its uses. It puts some skeletal stuff in place. We're going to skip it today. That is, I want to work with you to build all of the pieces independently of what it auto-generates for you. So actually just make it a regular Java project. We're not going to create from a template. And I'm going to go ahead and call the project tip. And so I've got my IntelliJ window over here. And once you're inside tip, you should go to the source folder. And I would like for you to create a new package. And go ahead and also name the package tip. I was feeling very original when I came up with that. Within that package, we're going to create a class called tip with a capital T. So I'm going to create a new Java class. I'm going to call it tip. And there it is. And now what you can do is copy over this little block of code that I included on the website as the code for this class. And I'm going to explain for you what these different pieces mean and what they entail. So coming into here, first thing we notice is everything is red. We've kind of dealt with this before, but it's worth dealing with again. I'm going to go to File, Project Structure, and I've got JavaFX available, so I'm going to add it as a module. And I'm going to apply it and click OK. And now all the red goes away. Yes? No, I forgot to put it on Moodle. Let me do that right now because you mentioned it. Yeah, you can get to the, so that's a great question. Yeah, you can always get to these from the syllabus site, but I'm going to add it in Moodle as well while I'm thinking about it. So in case you're curious as what instructor view looks like, you might not be that curious. One funny thing that Moodle does is by default, we can't actually edit our Moodle pages. We have to turn editing on explicitly. I guess to have that set up so we don't accidentally destroy things. And I'm going to edit settings on it. And of course, this is just left over from the last time I taught the class. So I'm going to edit my URL to be F19. And I think February of 2018 is a very aggressive due date that is not appropriate. So I think sometime in 2019 might be preferable. In fact, February 2019 would also not be productive. I think we will go with October. I wonder if it is, no, the 26th is not good. We're going to go with the 21st. Yeah. And save and return to course. Oh, and I have to make it visible. So I'm going to show it. So it's now there. It's now there in Moodle. So I'm glad you asked, Paxton. Okay. So coming back to IntelliJ and this thing we're doing, I want to talk about the components. So we'll go back to the imports later as the various pieces show up. First thing to mention is I have to create a class that extends what's called the application class. And the application class is part of JavaFX. The application class basically contains all the plumbing to set up the graphical user interface material. It comes with all kinds of methods. The only method we have to supply is a method named start. Now, start gets called kind of indirectly. If you look down at public static void main, where all Java programs start, it calls some mysterious method named launch. So launch is a method that belongs to the application class. Launch does all kinds of behind-the-scenes setup to get the GUI set up. And once it's done, it calls start. And start is a method into which it passes an object called a stage. And the stage is basically just where it puts your GUI, is the way you can think about it. So it passes in a stage, and we need to put stuff on that stage. So how does it proceed from here? Line 13 creates an object called an fxml loader. Now, what the heck is that? We're going to create our GUI in what's called an fxml file. That file is a text file that shows the logical layout of our user interface. And what we're going to do is use the fxml loader to take that textual layout file and transform it into a bunch of Java objects for us to interact with. So we ask the loader to load our thing. And here's the first mistake, is the root type I had wrong. It should be a VBox. And that makes it turn red. So I'm going to Alt-Enter, and now it's there. So how does this line work? Here we created the loader object. Here we're going to call the load method. And now things get really weird. Get class gets a reference to all the data for this class tip running within the Java virtual machine. Get resource says, look in the directory where this class is located and try to find a file named tipgui.fxml. You'll notice that if we were to run this now, it would not work because tipgui.fxml does not exist yet. We will be fixing that, but right now, not so good. And then OpenStream is just a way to open that file up. So that stream is something that the loader uses to grab the contents of this fxml file, which describe how the GUI should be laid out, and it then turns it into a bunch of Java objects, which we can then employ. Once we've got those Java objects in place, we need to bridge our user interface, which is this thing here, this object root, with this stage, which is the place where it goes. So we tell the stage that we want to set a scene containing our root. And that plugs the stuff we described in the fxml file into all of the plumbing that's just been set up for us. And once all that's set up, we tell the stage, it is time to show yourself. It is time to activate, to come alive. Of course, none of this will work because this file doesn't exist yet. But that's what this main infrastructure is about. And so every fxml program you write is going to look a lot like this for its main class. So let's look at the next bit of our instructions. So what we're going to do now is create the fxml file. Back when I created this lab with Eclipse, there was kind of a way to integrate it into Eclipse. We're not going to bother with all that stuff. Instead, we are going to start up Scene Builder. And so I am starting up Scene Builder. A little bit of the history of this project. JavaFX was originally created by Oracle, the company that owns and manages Java. However, for reasons that are completely obscure to me, they decided to cut it loose from the main Java distribution. And this company called Gluon decided to take it over. And so Scene Builder is actually made by Gluon. So what we're going to do is start by creating an empty project. So let's look at what JavaFX entails. On the left, you've got these components that can go onto a user interface. Containers are things that you can put stuff in. Controls are things that do stuff like buttons and checkboxes and so forth. Menu actually lets you put up menu bars and things like that, menu items. Miscellaneous has a canvas that lets you kind of do graphic-y things. Yes? Oh. Crap. Yeah. So that is unfortunate. So follow along, and we'll try to hack a solution to this a little later. But follow along with how I do this, and it'll give you an idea of how we'll move forward. And then once I've gotten through this part, we'll see how we can hack it into these machines. So anyway, so this is how you set it up. And what we're going to do to start with is drag over a VBox. So a VBox is a vertical layout of stuff. So it's one thing on top of another thing on top of another thing. That's what a VBox is. So we can put things in this VBox, and that's what we're going to do next. And what I have in mind for this tip calculator is to vertically lay out a series of horizontal boxes that contain the actual content that I want to have. So I'm first going to add an H box. In this H box, I am going to put 2 items. First, I'm going to put a label, and then I'm going to put a text field. And what this is going to allow us to do is to edit things on the fly. Okay. So, let the user type stuff in. I'm going to go back here for reference on what we're going to name these things. So the label is going to be the bill. So this is going to be the money that you owe. And so I'm going to change the text on it to bill. So whenever you select an object in Scene Builder, you get a menu appear on the right that lets you change things about it along these lines. One thing that's sort of irritating about this is it sets up some default sizes that are just way too big. So what I'm going to do is go to the Layout menu and tell it to make the sizes smaller. Your user interface is actually described here on the right as in a hierarchy. So it actually forms a hierarchical tree. So the V box contains an H box, which contains a label and a text field. So you can actually navigate through components directly on this left-hand menu, which is really, really handy. So what it does by default for the V box is it makes the width 600 and the height 400. That looks kind of silly. What I want to do instead is use computed size. In other words, I'm going to base the size of it on the size of the components inside of it. And I want to do the same thing with my H box. So I'm going to switch this to use computed size. And now my program is a lot tinier, but that's okay. I'm going to add some more stuff to it shortly. So I'm going to drag this H box down here. And now I have a second H box. I'm going to look back over here about what I want to put in it. So here I'm going to put a label and a choice box. So coming over to the controls, I'm going to drag this label over. I'm going to drag this choice box over. And I'm going to name the label service. And choice box is all good. And now this H box is too big and fat. And so I'm going to go to Layout and use computed size. Now I'm going to add one more H box. I'm going to drag this all the way down here. And with this one, I want to display the total. So the idea is somebody's going to type in how much money they owe. Then in the choice box, they're going to pick how big a tip they want to give. And then we're going to see what their total looks like. So the label there and text field down here. And this H box is too big also, so I'm going to switch it to use computed size like that. And then this label, I'm going to name it total, like so. So I've put together sort of this cute little interface, and now I'm going to use Save As. And now here is something really, really crucial. I mentioned before that it needs to be in the same directory as the main that we're looking at. So when I do Save As, I need to make sure I save it there. So I am going to be careful to navigate to that. So I'm going to, in my case, it's in Idea Projects, Tip, and then I'm going to go into my source directory, Tip, and I'm going to call it Tip GUI, and then it'll save it as an FXML document. And now this next step is actually really, really important. I'm actually going to close Scene Builder entirely. The reason it winds up being important is later on we're bridging it back. It winds up making life a lot easier if it's just closed outright. And you'll notice I now have this FXML file here. So what do these things look like? Have you ever done any web programming? Like building a web page with HTML or anything? If you have, this might look a lot like the stuff in a web page. That is, this is what's called a markup language, and it describes how components are laid out. So all of the dragging and dropping stuff that we just did winds up looking something like the following. At the root, we have a VBox. It has children, one of which is an HBox, which in turn has children, a label, and a text field.
Wait, so this is how we can quickly build the code for...
Yeah, you can actually build the GUI purely from text, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, but we can use Scene Builder to quickly build the scene.
Exactly, yeah. So this is what Scene Builder generates.
Okay, so that's
Yeah. And so, we've got this other HBox that has a label and a choice box and so forth. I don't usually write this stuff from scratch. I usually use Scene Builder, but sometimes I've edited it if Scene Builder isn't making it do quite what I want. So now I've got my fxml file, and I've got that located in the same directory. So the next step is I'm going to start building the Java code that's actually going to make all this stuff work. The first bit of Java code I'm going to create is an enum. So in particular, we're going to create an enum that represents different levels of service. So poor service will get a tip of 10%, good service will get 15%, and great service will get 20%. So I am going to copy this enum on over, and I'm going to go to my package. I'm going to say I want a new Java class. The kind of a class is an enum, and I'm going to name it service. And then I'm going to paste that code from the web page. And here it is in its full Java glory. Every object of this enum type has a compute total method that uses the tip method to calculate the total that you're going to get. So it's 1.0 plus the tip multiplied by the bill. So that is step 3. Step 4. So like I mentioned, we need a way to tie this all together so that the Java code knows how to talk to the fxml, and the fxml knows how to talk to the Java. The way that we do this is creating a class called a controller. So I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call it tip controller. And this class is going to be the bridge between the user interface and the heart of what we're doing. So I'm going to copy this over, and then I'm going to explain the different pieces of it. So copying this over here, let's look at the pieces of this class. First thing you'll notice are all of these fxml annotations associated both with some objects as well as with some methods. So you might remember when we created this user interface earlier, we put a text field there, a choice box there, and a text field. So here I actually have objects of those data types. By putting the fxml annotation here in Scene Builder, it's going to make the object visible. So I'm going to create a binding between the object in the fxml file and the object in the controller. And it won't even care that they are private. The fxml annotation will make them visible. This method, initialize, must be included in every controller and must have the fxml tag on it. But otherwise, you're not going to directly call it. What's going to happen is that the whole fxml infrastructure is a little bit of a hack. So it's going to read in your fxml file, but before it reads it in, it's going to create the controller object. Then as it reads in the fxml file, it's going to start stuffing things in there. So in the fxml file, it sees, oh, there's a text field and it's bound to bill. Well, time to call the bill constructor and stuff it in. So initialize is separate from the constructor because the object has already been constructed when the loader starts plugging in these different pieces into it. So once all that happens, then it calls initialize. And I've got some things going on in initialize. I tell the bill that it is editable. It's a text field where the user can type. I tell the total it is not editable. I don't want the user typing anything there. In this next part, I populate my choice box with options. So for every value in my service enum, I tell my tips box, get your items, which winds up being something akin to an array list, and add that enum to it. And then I tell the tip selector to start by assuming the service is good. So that's the default option that it creates. Then I've got this method called calculate that does the algorithmic calculation, or actually not so much the algorithmic calculation, it just grabs pieces from the interface and invokes the calculation. So the amount entered, it parses that text field into a double. It gets the service level directly from the choice box. And then it computes the total amount by telling the service enum to compute the total based on what was entered. And so that goes over to this compute total method. This program is pretty simple, but it illustrates an important design principle. When people build these things, they often get tempted to dump all the calculations into the controller. That is the worst thing to do in terms of building maintainable software. The job of the controller is just to bridge together the user interface and the rest of the program. You don't typically want anything like an algorithm directly in the controller. You want it to be calling something. In this case, even the trivial algorithm to calculate this tip is delegated to be elsewhere than in the controller. And so then I use string.format to make it look pretty, and I put it in the text box. So at this point, we might think we're ready to run. So I'm going to run it. And it tells me the JavaFX runtime components are missing and are required to run this application. And at this point, I'm just very, very annoyed. And so I need to add another thing. I need to add module info for tip. And I have forgotten the syntax for this thing. So this is something that's not on the web page. So what I'm going to do is I am going to open up some other program I wrote that got this right. Like, for example, about the maze. Yeah, maze sounds good. So I'm going to open that in a new window. And I'm going to look for my module info. There we go. I have to say that it requires these things and then opens that thing. So coming back to tip, it requires these things and then it opens tip. That's just the name of this package here. And now I'm going to try running it again. And now it runs. Now it's actually executing. So you need this little module info.java. Something very, very irritating. It didn't used to need that, but so I never used module info.java basically the last time I taught the class. But in the meantime, Java has gotten more complicated. So if I have, say, a $50 bill, I can now pick the service level I want. I should be able to pick that service level, but good grief, it's not there. It's not there at all. How frustrating is that? Here's the missing piece. in tip GUI, I need to tell it where to find the controller. So I'm going to restart Scene Builder with the sole purpose of thusly informing it of this thing. And so I'm going to say I want this recent thing that I built. And there it is. And now way down here is this controller menu. Now here's something really, really irritating. You can't leave Scene Builder open and then create a controller class and then have it available on this drop-down menu. You actually have to close Scene Builder, reopen it with your FXML file in the right place, and then your controller will automatically appear as an option. It basically looks for a Java class that has FXML tags on an initialize method. So now that I've got my controller, there's all kinds of neat stuff I can do. So I'm going to start by clicking on this text field. And notice that there's this whole code menu down here. So I can tell it under identity, it asks for the FX:ID. I want this text box to be the variable bill. That variable, you might recall, was set up over here. So what I'm doing now is I am binding the FXML file to my controller's objects. So that was handy. Next, I'm going to do this little choice box, and that is associated with the tips object. So notice that this isn't going to be statically checked, right? So tips is a choice box, but the Scene Builder isn't actually going to check that for me. Instead, it'll just fail when you run it if the types don't match. But tips is a choice box, and I know that'll work. And then I go down to the text field total, and I'm going to bind that there. But now I need a way to actually force it to do the calculation. And to that end, I'm going to add a button. So I am going to look back at my object hierarchy. I'm going to, come back. I'm going to drag this button. I'm going to put it between where I input stuff and where I see the total. And I'm going to put a label on here like calculate total. And now I'm going to save, and I'm going to close Scene Builder again. I tend not to leave it open. Another reason it's helpful not to leave it open is I have found in practice, Scene Builder hogs more battery than practically any other app I've run on a laptop. I don't know why it uses so much electricity, but there it is. So if I were to look at the FXML file now, we would see references to these various things, like FX:controller is tip controller, and text field FX:ID equals bill. So the associations are embedded in that code. So now I can run tip again. And I can put in a bill of $50, and now I can pick whether the service was poor, good, or great. I can calculate the total. And dang, I see absolutely nothing. Oh yeah, I forgot to make the button do anything. How silly of me. I'm reopening Scene Builder now. We're going to open this recent thing. I'm going to go back over to the button. And in the code section, we can tell what method to run on an action. So when the button is clicked, I want it to call the calculate method. Now I'm going to save this, and I'm going to close it. Now I'm going to run it again. And my bill is 50, my service is good, I calculate the total, and it's $57.50. Now, what if the service was poor? Then my total is only 55. What if the service is great? Then my total is 60. And that's building a JavaFX application from the ground up. What about the rest of the lab? So, and we'll work and see what we can do to get Scene Builder going. I want you to make a couple edits to this thing. First, I want you to add an excellent category to the service tipped at 18%. So excellent is somewhere between good and great for this purpose. And then I want you to play with the interface and find a way to enable the user to enter the number of people that are eating. Then I want you to add a field to display the amount of money each individual separately owes, assuming they are splitting the check evenly. You may assume they are splitting the check evenly for this purpose. So overall, you shouldn't find this lab is all that hard. It's really just follow through those instructions, and these little tweaks should be really easy. So the whole purpose of this lab is actually to set you up for project 2, which I'll go ahead and briefly explain now. So project 2 is got the incorrect link. I'll have to fix this after class. This goes to the S18 one. You want the F19, but it'll be pretty similar. I want you to write a Java application along the following lines. Build a GUI for it with JavaFX and Scene Builder. At least 2 of the GUI components should have event handlers. That is, you click a button and something happens. That's an event handler that produce visible changes to the GUI. This GUI should have some persistent state that is modeled by a class of your own creation. This class should represent an abstraction of the underlying data representation. That is, the user should be able to enter data in some form, and by entering data, there's a data structure that changes its value in some way. And that data structure should be separate from your controller. It should be separate from your controller. And then the program should do something useful or interesting. It need not be complex, but it should be something that someone would conceivably want to use. And then you're just going to zip the thing up and turn it in. Any project that meets these first 3 bullets, this is going to be a 60-point project. For meeting the first 3 bullets, you earn up to 50 points. And if I find something really interesting or creative or innovative about it, it might go up to 60 points. So it's kind of a lot like Project 1, except here you're doing graphical user interfaces, and I'm not requiring any particular type of data structure. It should just be something that maintains state in some way. Something that maintains state in some way. Aside from figuring out what to do about Scene Builder, any questions? Okay, so let me go ahead and end the recording, and then we're going to try to problem solve